This exhibition develops a relationship between drawing and video. At times I animate drawn elements, and I draw with a sense of dynamic or shimmering motion associated with moving image. Both video and drawing register the motion of the hand. They share certain cognitive processes and have a relationship with duration. Looping videos, circular motifs, the rotary motion of the camera also play off each other. I never draw with a plan. It's a discovery throughout. I never shoot really with a plan. I normally just go back to the same place and kind of exhaust a couple approaches until something new happens, which is why I prefer to work with subject matter that I don't have to schedule anything other than the quality of light. There's no shortcuts to this process of digging for the shot, but there are more and less effective structures and dispositions to increase your luck, like discernment and really an openness to the world to deliver you something different than you sought out, like the fact that a semi-truck happened to be idling near my tripod, sending vibrations up into it and causing the hand of the pointer statue to quiver in an analog jitter. Bill Viola's The Sound of One-Line Scanning is a contribution to earlier discourses about video, trying to develop a notion of medium specificity for it. And part of that was distinguishing video as the outgrowth of audio, acoustic recording technology, whereas cinema comes from, photographic celluloid images repeated. He says all videos are essentially drone music compositions, and I think he actually says they're like ragas, and he associates it with some like sound as first principle thing in probably a misreading of some Hindu text. Doesn't matter. There are a couple drones in the exhibition, in the video of urchin foragers, and in the one video I filmed in the hospital, the ambient sound of the video is tuned to a chord using a parametric EQ, sharpening, heightening, and sculpting the existing frequencies into a harmony rather than adding a score. So you work with what's already there. I started making these video gestures in 2021 after I took a year off to make music, and the videos ended up being around song length and mixed and developed using strategies of coaxing out latent qualities in media the way you might process a piece of recorded audio. They are gallery videos, so there's certain assumptions that a spectator will rove, enter and exit a video at different points. The biggest inspiration for this show was spending a lot of time with Lutz Bacher's monograph Snow that includes many of her video gestures. Although she pulls it towards sculpture and installation, I pull it towards drawing. There's many more people in the video gesture tree, but I spent so much time with Snow, I think it's worth mentioning. I find this mode of spectatorship to be a very interesting challenge and productive in an exhibition like this, in which videos of different lengths are not synced up. Bracketed by other videos and drawings, you're sort of moving around in and out of them, further producing a sense of infinite dispersive permutation. Animation makes the videos more subjective. There's a personal symbol set, chains of appended associations that have to do with my purview and my life. Animation also heralds something more general, which is an invisible world of discarded sense data, social abstractions, language that mediate and occlude reality. Over time, my animations have become more gestural in order to keep moving through ideas with fewer software bottlenecks. Video workflows tend to be pretty stop and start. Gotta wait for stuff to process. And I don't really like that. I want to make it feel more similar to drawing and writing, actually, where your thought is really like actively synced up with the activity the whole time. So I don't really do like flashy VFX, processor intensive stuff like I used to. I try to get the most out of very simple, quick masks, time displacement, dissolves, loops, and straightforward collage and compositing techniques. These go a super long way if you're working with good building blocks, which is also what I'm looking for when I'm shooting now. And ultimately, I really arrived at a totally agnostic, like, it could all land somewhere attitude. I don't believe that there are unusable pieces of media. Some just kind of have their utility deferred in time. I've sat on media fragments for years before they got integrated into artworks proper. You change, your perspective changes. Something that used to be a quixotic odd duck, something peripheral, superfluous, marginal, becomes central, the main thing, and the whole thing gets turned inside out. And if you can start to control that process, it really starts to feel like alchemy. And once you found the right combination of moves and elements, it doesn't take a lot of technical virtuosity to complete any of these animations. Okay, there's something ambient about the works that reflects my own tendency to kind of zone in and out as I make work. I really like Ray Tarada's book, Looking Away. She has many examples of people who express dissatisfaction with the world and take leave of it into forms of ocular play. One example is psychotic patients who lose themselves in flecks of color in the concrete. I love that. I'm always thinking about the flecks of color in the concrete. You can lose yourself in the wet folds of a single dollop of scrambled eggs, or the luminescent textures of a trippy aquatic pet store, or in a nationalistic epithet, which produces a different but not wholly unrelated kind of unreality feeling. Like hate is trippy too. I thought more about painting for this exhibition than any previous show, even though there aren't any paintings in it. I call the gouache stuff drawing. It's drawing. I think that one thing paint does that drawing doesn't is generate its own details. When drawing, you draw them in yourself. And a lot of people have commented on the details in the drawings. And I always like to mention an excerpt from Bachelard's dissertation. I think it's so good. Detail is richness, but also uncertainty. At the level of detail, thought and reality appear to be set adrift from another. Reality loses its solidity, and in a certain way, its constancy, its substance. Finally, reality and thought are engulfed in the same nothingness. So there's something annihilatory and obliterative in details, and I think that's what keeps me in them. The smallest vertical drawings, me and Otto Bonin, the curator, we called them star drawings internally. They're the spine of the show. They can be thought of as a non-sequential animation. I used to really want a lot of novelty, like so many new forms all the time. And then I arrived at this one form bursting forth, which really distilled a motif of exploding emergence, which had previously presented in drawings, but really as one element among others. Once I fixated on it, I ended up achieving more variation by working in a serial, repetitive mode, flaring out around the circle again and again. Most begin as an attempt to repeat a previous drawing, which is impossible. So failing to repeat becomes the best way to generate different approaches that disperse across multiple works. I always work on 2 or more at a time while working on the medium and larger drawings and the videos as well, normally after draw during the day, computer stuff at night. So they have a propulsive quality for the rest of the practice. They are, in a sense, it's motor. This exhibition reflects my interest in a set of questions associated with modernism, one of which is the relationship between modernism and spirituality. I am engaged with no mystical or spiritual texts. It's not really an interest of mine. What I am interested in is when you read something like Krauss's essay on grids, and she has a line that's like, there's a contradiction between science and spirituality. Is the repressed unconscious of modern art. The contradiction between science and spirituality is the repressed unconscious of modern art. I was trying to figure out some art questions. How to make a drawing, how to make a work of art. These are my questions. I saw these strategies of focusing on a symmetrical circular form, sometimes akin to a mandala, sometimes more cosmic, sometimes more like a negativity or a collapsing inward, as a solution to certain art aporias. In the process, forms associated with spiritualism basically crept in the back door, and then they were already in the house. And I said, okay, fine, you can stay. I also think I've embraced them after a brush with mortality. There's something about how the experience of making a symmetrical patterned drawing or writing an elliptical essay or replaying a video over and over in the editing bay that pulls the mind away from the body and its suffering and its absolute corporeal finitude. And this is a very different way to arrive at these spiritually inflected aesthetics than, say, an earnest belief in any sort of cosmological monism. I got no opinions on it. I leave that one up to others. The second modernist thematic that I find timeless and like endlessly inspirational, really, is reflecting on the transformation of consciousness by traversing urban space, walking around the city. One work, which is my favorite video on the show for that reason, and also because how much it connects to earlier videos in my practice, is Facade Rotary Sequence, in which I walk around San Francisco's Billionaire Row in Pac Heights and observe the mansion facades wearing a beaded mask. I've made these rotary sequences since 2019 by building custom helmet rigs so that I can film myself looking at things, orbiting the camera from me to what I'm looking at and back again. The subject matter of the sequence registers my interests at the time of filming. When I was interested in diaspora, 2018, 2019, I filmed Halloween decorations in Indo-Caribbean neighborhoods in Queens. When I was dealing with existential apocalyptic emotions in 2023, I filmed the dark voids at the end of subway platforms in New York. And now, having spent a year trying to escape an intense bodily reality, I feel like I've been in a sort of nightmare, and I became obsessed with the dreamscape of these multi-million-dollar mansions. And I wonder why rich and evil people would want to conjure this hallucinatory atmosphere in their neighborhood full of abstract, psychedelic, patterned motifs in Spanish colonial revival, Italianate, Victorian, and contemporary architectural styles, featuring lots of semi-opaque glass surfaces, dramatic shadows, grids, illuminated gardens, ornaments, columns, and engraved French doors, as in the 1912 Getty Mansion, which appears towards the end of this sequence. Also watched a lot of SF noir to crack this piece open. I was inspired to start drawing the Earth when Paul Gilroy, my MA advisor, held up a first edition copy of W.E.B. Du Bois's The World in Africa and emphasized that putting the whole planet on the cover of a book in 1947, a time when Du Bois was committing himself to the peace movement, was a radical gesture. Today, any image of the Earth obviously brings up climate change, and works like End of the World speak to that didactically. More subtle is Grazers, in which I filmed sheep and goats brought into my neighborhood to clear dry brush, since they make quicker work of it than humans. A practice that is seeing increasing popularity as California faces annual wildfire threats. I filmed wildfire smoke over the salt marshes near Facebook in 2019 in Morning in Advance. 2023, My Coarsening has footage from a burned out redwood forest. I make landscape videos, just as the gouache and pastel earths, I consider them landscape drawings. But the enigmatic image of the Earth encodes much more than the specter of catastrophe. It is a sort of fulcrum for many different strains of emancipatory politics and thought as soon as it enters our visual imagination. Soviet propaganda, many other artists, thinkers return to it. Du Bois, Badiou, Tech, Pettibon, for sure. Movie director, film director, Cyberberg, Ivans. It's everywhere, but somehow I still want more Earth. One of the most important pieces of advice that Otto gave me was that it didn't really matter how the works looked at the end. This allowed me to take a leap of faith and devote myself wholly to a process of discovery. Philip Guston spoke about the horizon for the process of painting being a sort of evacuation of agency from the artist, to the point that where the marks fall basically feels like fate. I think it's super difficult to achieve. I will say there's only one complete drawing in the show where I'll say I think I got there, and it's my favorite drawing in the show basically for that reason. It's titled Apparition. Those marks, they couldn't have happened any other way. They're exactly where they only ever could have been. And yet it, I can't say it with a straight face. It's all contingency and decisions. Otto offered me this show while I was finishing up chemotherapy for acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and I immediately started shooting and drawing. However, we talked a lot about how we didn't want this to be an illness show because honestly, there's just way more to me. I'm an artist. That said, autobiographically speaking, the experience of illness has been transformative like nothing else in my life. And also you just start to see it everywhere. De Chirico associates the birth of metaphysical painting with an unspecified experience of severe illness, after which he had an epiphany sitting in a plaza. And then, famously, these plazas get emptied out and filled with his objects and mannequins and fruits. Bolaño wrote 2 of his best novels after his diagnosis of terminal liver disease, and I do think the sort of barreling forward motion of his prose has this sort of exhaustive need to get it all out there before time's up quality. As I got further from treatment, that's late style, as I got further from treatment, signifiers of illness naturally faded away. Most of the work I made while still in the hospital got cut, save for the video called Not Fog Eucalyptus Methotrexate. The experience of treatment does recur in certain biomorphic forms, loosely resembling the spine, the pelvis, and the lymphocyte. The reason why I'm delivering these remarks from home rather than Zurich is that a couple of days before I was supposed to fly out to install this exhibition, I was diagnosed with a different mutated acute lymphoblastic leukemia. In a highly unusual return that is not a relapse of the original cancer, but a new, different, and also worse, but still hopefully curable, addition. I'm sharing this frankly pretty personal information because I do think it changes the tenor of the exhibition. Instead of a journey upward and outward from a condition of biomedical corporeal existence to a fuller humanity in which I can focus on the realm of ideas, texts, artworks, histories, and not just the chemical, chromosomal, quantitative makeup of my cells. The exhibition is made basically in a blinking interval, a very small aperture of health, 6 months really, bookended by illness and treatment, which brings me to the title of the exhibition, Big Casino, which is what Junior Soprano calls his cancer when he's diagnosed in The Sopranos. This euphemistic term for cancer originates in the 1960s heist movie Ocean's 11, the original one. They call cancer the big casino because the house always wins, which I hope not to be the case. I will say that now that it is only a 6-month interval of decent health, I wouldn't have spent the time any other way. I loved making this show. I was so happy to have, again, what I thought of as an off-ramp. And I do think that this is an exhibition that takes great pleasure and even freedom in thought and art making, and that this is probably the truest frame for this multifaceted exhibition.